All right. I will go ahead and get everything kicked off. So again, this is Adam Coleman with Wyndham Capital Mortgage. I wanted to have a quick webinar on the 2-1 buy down, kind of go through the process, kind of compare that to a few other alternative options and see, hopefully give everybody a little bit more information on where to fit this into kind of the sales strategy, how to use this to market a listing, kind of see how it compares to a price reduction. There's a lot of things that we'll go through, but I expect it to take about 30 minutes. So I'll kind of get started here at this point. So again, a little bit about me. Again, my name is Adam Coleman. I've been in the mortgage industry with Wyndham Capital actually for over 13 years now. I've worked on probably about 2,500 different loan transactions over my time here. Been one of the President's Club, members for pretty much the entire time I've been here. I'm a certified mortgage planning specialist. It's a terminology that a lot of people don't really see or know about. There's a certified financial planner, which is kind of the standard in financial planning. I kind of equate this to kind of a CFP in the mortgage world. Most mortgage lenders and mortgage bankers kind of fall into maybe more of a stockbroker role where it's very transactional. They're just doing this one transaction, maybe only focused on the mortgage. It's kind of an order taking kind of strategy. It's not really a mortgage planning strategy. So I will say that I try to differentiate myself from the competition when it comes to actually taking more of a holistic approach to mortgage planning, really looking at the mortgage as just one small piece of the overall financial picture that people have. There's so much that goes into it, related to investments, risk tolerances, what type of term makes the most sense for everybody based on that other financial goals that they have. Should you pay off a mortgage faster? There's a lot that goes into it, especially in terms of like investment properties and cash flow analysis. I want to be there for the person forever. I definitely want that lender for life mentality. And this helps me get that just because I have the training to kind of go through a lot more than just, hey, what's your interest rate? Can we save you money? Let's try to get a low cost option. There's definitely a lot more that goes into it. I'm licensed pretty much all over, pretty much any major state where most people live. But if not, I have a whole team here with me that we are licensed here at Wyndham Capital in, I believe, 47 states at this point. Really, I think New York, Massachusetts, and Hawaii are probably the only three that we can't operate in at this point. But enough about me. The whole point of this is to kind of go through the 2-1 buy down. So this is a program that's been around for ever since before I even started, 13 years ago. It's just not gained much popularity anytime recently, until recently, I should say, because mortgage rates have come up so much compared to where they were in the last decade, really, at this point. People are getting more creative, and we have to come up with different programs that will hopefully, make things a little bit easier for buyers and sellers both. So the long and short of it with a 2-1 buy down, it's essentially a temporary reduction to mortgage interest rate for the first 2 years. And you're using a seller paid closing cost credit or seller concession to cover the cost of that 2-1 buy down. So, essentially what it means is that, let's say the current market rate is 7%, which, the market rates right now are a little bit lower because of, the inflation numbers that came out last Thursday. But at the time when I created this, it was right around 7%. So with a 2-1 buy down, you can reduce the rate on the first year down to 5%. So your rate gets reduced 2 percentage points from the market rate. And then in year two, it gets reduced down 1%. So let's say if the market's 7%, first year is 5%, second year 6%, and then in the third year and beyond, it would be the 7% going forward. It's not an adjustable rate mortgage. It's not an ARM. A lot of people worry that it's a higher risk scenario by doing this. It's not any of those things. This is a purely fixed rate loan, and it's really just utilizing that seller credit to take advantage of lower payments on the first 2 years. It gives the buyers a little bit more comfort, making the payments, being able to afford the house, that obviously there's a bit of a sticker shock involved with houses with the rates being where they are currently. Even after the rate dropped from, last Thursday, they're still significantly higher than when some people even started their house search early this year. So, this is helping them kind of get comfortable with the process. A lot of people are hoping that refinance options will be down the road within a couple of years. We'll discuss that here in a second to see where that fits in. But this is the idea: is hopefully getting buyers a little bit more willing to kind of move forward on a house, understanding that home ownership is still a great option, still better than renting in most cases if they're planning on being there for a long-term scenario. So this is just getting them another option to take advantage of. And it hopefully gives the seller a more creative option as well to market their house, which we'll go through here in a second. So, where does this fit in? Obviously, again, you could always have the 2-1 buy down. That was always a scenario that you could look into. Why wasn't it that big of a deal years past? Part of it is just because the rates were so low that nobody needed to worry about the rate being reduced down temporarily from 3% or 2% even. So this was not a popular product really at any point. But what we're seeing now, and where I see the biggest benefit from this, is comparing this to like a price reduction. So, all across the country, we're seeing a ton of different price reductions, really in every market that I've seen for the most part. There's a pretty good number of price reductions. If you plug in a zip code on Zillow or somewhere else, you're going to see a ton of different price reductions all across the map. And they're usually not small. You're talking $10, $15, $20,000 price reductions across the board. Does that help, or is that the best option? So that's what we're going to discuss right here. Is how does a price reduction compare to a seller paid buy down? So in this example, you've got a $500,000 purchase price. So let's say it's sitting on the market for a couple of weeks and just not getting any activity. The sellers are getting stressed and they want to find a different option. So then they're looking at price reductions. So, is that the best, plan A option when you're trying to market a house, as a seller or a listing agent? You could obviously reduce the price. For this example, I wanted to compare apples to apples. So, the cost of a 2-1 buy down would be about $11,000 in this scenario. So let's say the seller wanted to get more interest from buyers. They could obviously reduce the price by $11,000 and get it down to $489, for the listing. What does that do though? Yes, I guess from a seller that's solely focused on the price, then that could be enough to suddenly get more interested buyers into the mix. But does it really change, just psychologically, what are they really going to get out of that? And at the end of the day, what they're doing is they're saving about $70 a month for this example. So if they buy a 489 purchase price, let's say 5% down with a 7% rate, their monthly principal and interest payment is $3,090. That compares to what it would have been if they just kept the $500,000 purchase price of $3,160. So they're saving less than $70 a month. Does that really move the needle or change a buyer's perspective of that house because they're saving $70 a month? It could. It's obviously not an insignificant amount of money. Long term, it's a huge amount of savings. I get that. But, in my experience, a buyer it's not a make or break for $70 a month. That's not going to suddenly get them excited. It's not going to suddenly make them afford or qualify for a house. That's usually not the difference maker. So, alternatively, instead of just coming out of the gates with a price reduction, maybe gets a little bit more creativity and look at a potential seller paid buy down, where the seller offers, instead of reducing the price, go, well, I understand, it might be overpriced, but, here's another alternative is you could buy, basically a 2-1 buy down with $11,000 worth of seller credits. And you can market it this way. You can put it in the public comments or private comments, whatever you want to do, whatever that is kind of customary in your area to try to market the buy down. But basically show an $11,000 credit being paid to the buyer. So what that does is keep the purchase price of $500,000. Seller still gets the same net $489 amount. The seller shouldn't care between a seller credit or a price reduction. It's the exact same from their perspective. As long as the appraisal is going to be, coming in high enough, then there's no difference between these two scenarios from a seller's perspective. So, from a buyer's perspective, what does that $11,000 seller credit do? Now, obviously, you could use it to cover closing costs, but in a lot of cases, there aren't enough closing costs to take advantage of that in most states. $11,000 would be a very large credit unless you're trying to buy the rate down, permanently, which we'll discuss here in a second as well. But the other option would be to either market the 2-1 buy down, or buyer's agents need to understand that there is an option to do a 2-1 buy down along with mortgage lenders as well. This is obviously on all of us to kind of educate our buyers and sellers about this program. But if they do a 2-1 buy down, how does that compare to a price reduction in this case? The payment for year one actually drops $540 compared to the price reduction option. So even though you're paying more for the house, your payment each month is $540 less in the first year. Even in year two, it would be $242 less. So in the first year, that's equivalent to something closer to like a $90,000 price reduction, which is huge. Obviously, from a buyer's perspective, $540 a month is massive. That's nowhere close to the $70 that we'd be talking about with the price reduction. And even in 2 years, or year two, $240 a month savings, which is, again, a huge savings for them. So psychologically, they're much more interested in that property. They can see themselves affording that a little bit better. And again, even long term, their payment's only going to be $70 more, even if they have that same mortgage and the same house more than the 2 years, and their price adjusts to the market rate. They're still only paying $70 more than they would have if they just had a price reduction. So in a lot of cases, I see this being a huge savings and a huge benefit from the buyer's perspective, where they suddenly look at this house a whole different way, where suddenly they can see the payment. Maybe they're expecting a job promotion, maybe they're expecting just a change in finances. Maybe they're just worried about those first couple years of home ownership, where you can have major expenses pop up, especially if they don't have like a home warranty, or even with a home warranty, there's stuff that comes up when you buy a house, furniture, moving expenses, your repairs that you just weren't even expecting. Especially first-time home buyers don't really know kind of what they're getting into a lot of times, and there's just expenses that pile up. This is a huge savings for them because they don't have that stress of jumping straight into a huge payment right from the start. So it kind of bridges that gap to get them from when they buy the house to year three, when they can start making the normal payment as well. So if you get the seller on board with the seller credit, obviously there's other options you can use the seller credit for. So you can obviously use the seller credit to just cover closing costs and not do any sort of buy down, which in certain cases is going to be better. So for a permanent buy down versus a 2-1 buy down, at what point does one make more sense than the other? In this example, same $500,000 purchase price, 5% down, $11,000 seller credit. What can you do with a permanent buy down versus a 2-1? So when I ran these numbers, back when, I think it was probably about a week ago when I had all this ran, basically the current rate being 7%, if you spend $11,000 just on like a buy down, like 2 points worth of a rate discount, you could drop your rate from 7 down to around 6.25 at that time. Current rates are lower than that, so obviously, the market's going to be different. But on average, two discount points is probably going to work out to be about 0.75 on the rate. So long term, that's great, because then you're only paying 6.25 forever instead of 5% year one, 6% year two, and then 7% for the life of the loan. If you're going to keep the mortgage for 30 years, it's a no-brainer. You just do the permanent buy down. But how many people really keep the same mortgage for 30 years? Hardly any at this point. The average lifespan of a mortgage is 4 to 7 years. So, if you're talking about a shorter term, that's where the 2-1 buy down comes into play. Because again, year one, you're still saving $375 a month for the 2-1 buy down compared to the permanent buy down. And then in year two, you still are saving $77 a month compared to the permanent buy down. It's only in year three and beyond when you're starting to pay more because of the higher interest rate. So, running the break even and kind of the recoup time, you're basically looking at a little bit over 4 years to break even on this, which means if there is any sort of likely chance that you sell or refinance this property in the next 4 years, you're actually better off going with the 2-1 buy down. If you're planning on keeping it and never going to refinance, and you're going to keep it more than 4 years, then the permanent buy down would be potentially a better option. A lot of people are potentially expecting rates to drop sometime over the next couple of years. So a lot of people are predicting that there could be a refinance market that happens for people buying now and wanting to refinance at some point in the near future. Whether it's, inflation becomes a non-issue, it gets back down to kind of manageable levels, or if we start to see a recession kick in, or a little bit of both. Obviously, most of those things are going to trigger mortgage rates coming down. And if that happens anytime in the next 4 years, as long as property values don't drastically go down to where refinancing potentially can't happen, there will be markets where we can refinance. And certainly anytime I'm doing a loan for somebody, that's the goal. Is I'm going to keep them updated. I'm going to let them know, as soon as rates drop, I'm going to be in touch with you, and then we can do a refinance, with no lender fees, very limited closing costs, and take advantage of the lower interest rates. Now, if rates don't go down, obviously we need to, people need to understand that that's a possibility. So nobody, anybody claiming that rates are absolutely going to go down, they can't know that. There's no way of guaranteeing that, but we can plan accordingly and make sure that the buyer knows all the different options for this. So again, in this case, a 2-1 buy down is not the perfect solution for everybody. You really need a lender that kind of goes through the process with them, understands the pros and the cons, kind of go through and see, what scenario would one make sense versus the other. So then, really with this, the main guidelines to worry about with the 2-1 buy down is that, and this is a big one. So a lot of people think that, oh, this might, sound like too good to be true. Like it could be like predatory lending of some sort, but you are not qualified based on the lower interest rate. This is in no way trying to get somebody qualified for more house than they can afford. If anything, I always take a much more conservative approach to what somebody can afford versus what they qualify for. Just because most of the time the guidelines are still very, very easy or lax to allow somebody such a high debt to income ratio to qualify for, even based on the higher mortgage payment, that most people either can't afford that or they probably shouldn't afford that. And that gets into more of the financial planning aspect of this and making sure that they're not getting house poor. So again, the goal of this is to not get somebody to suddenly be able to afford a house that they shouldn't be looking at. We need to have that conversation with buyers to manage those expectations. This helps for the first 2 years if there's a good reason for that and there's seller credits available. But we don't want to get somebody into a house that they can't afford, obviously. Obviously, this only comes into play for seller paid buy downs. So the buyer can't do this themselves. But logistically, that's not an issue. Like there's no reason why a buyer would want to do this using their own funds. Essentially, they could do that themselves if they really wanted to. All a 2-1 buy down is basically an escrow account that's set up using that seller credit to then kind of funnel off money each month to pay that portion of the payment that they're saving, because the rate is different in the first year and in the second year as well. So a buyer could officially set up their own escrow account using their funds to kind of do the same thing, but there's no point to that. There's not really a benefit there. Again, this is only for purchase transactions. Again, it doesn't make sense for a refinance. If you're doing a refinance, you either want to do a permanent buy down, or honestly, if the plan was to do a short-term scenario where you think that you're going to change the property or do a refinance in a couple of years, if you were doing a refinance right now, you'd want to do it with little to no closing costs anyway. So again, only for a purchase transaction. Typically, it's only for a primary residence, although please reach out to me if you have any scenarios that are considering a 2-1 buy down for a second home, like a vacation property or a rental, because I am seeing some opening of guidelines for that. I've seen one with a second home where it was perfectly fine to do a 2-1 buy down. So this primary residence transaction only is not set in stone right now. So just keep me updated, and I can give you a real life updated scenario once I talk to you. But minimum credit score, again, this says 660. I just did one at a 657 credit score actually. So there are exceptions that can be done. Down, I believe 640 is probably the lowest that you would see. This is a major difference between lenders from what I've seen. The one I actually just did this week is because the in-house lender for whoever the realtor wanted to use or always typically refers out to couldn't do a 657, couldn't even do a 660 credit score on a 2-1 buy down. They required a 680, possibly even a 700 credit score. So this is a big difference between lenders, is some people have very strict guidelines to even use this program. So just be careful there. Even though somebody might be offering it, it might not be eligible for everybody. So, and some lenders just don't have access to it at all. So you just have to be careful there. This is not a program that's available to everybody. So let me know if you have any scenarios where it's less than 660 and you want to kind of see if a 2-1 buy down is an option. Chances are there's a good chance there might be. So one other main guideline is that the seller paid items, it's part of that max seller concession. So if you put less than 10% down on a conforming loan, you can only get up to 3% seller concessions. So this part fits in with that. So you can't ask for a 3% seller concession and an additional seller credit to do a buy down. So you just have to ask for whatever is available. We use a portion of that to cover the buy down, and then whatever's left over can be used as a normal seller credit towards closing costs. There's really not a scenario that I've seen where you really even approach that 3% mark. So, again, 3% is the minimum, or the bare minimum that you can ever get. Even if you put 5% down or 3% down, you can still get up to 3% seller concessions, even on a conforming loan. FHA is 6%, VA is even more in some cases. So that's not usually a main issue for people, but just understand that if you're getting into a situation with a ton of different seller credits or builder credits, we need to make sure that it doesn't go over that limit. But for large seller credits, this is a great option because most of the time you don't have enough seller credits, enough closing costs to use the seller credit for. So, the 2-1 buy down is a great option for that. So then, if the loan's paid off within 2 years, the big concern that I've heard from a lot of people is, well, am I losing that seller credit? Like, is this a negative if I refinance within the 2 years? Do I lose that potential? And the answer is no. You get full use of that seller credit. It's purely the buyer's. So it is sitting in an escrow account. It's the buyer's funds. If for some reason that loan is sold, or the house is sold, or the loan is paid off before the 2 years is up, whatever unused portions of that seller credit that was used for the buy down is refundable. So it would just come off the payoff when you pay it off, and then you just get applicable, applied that way. So again, it's kind of like an escrow account, like for your taxes and insurance. It's sitting in the same type of escrow account, so that's not wasted money. The buyer is going to see full use of that. So that's a big one. That's a big advantage of this, where you don't have to worry about if you do sell or refinance within the 2 years, you do still get credit for the seller buy down. One thing these last two things are good for realtors to know, just because there's an additional document that needs to be signed at closing. It's just a temporary buy down agreement. So we'll prepare that, send it to the title company to sign, but it's always good to let the buyers and the sellers know that there's just one extra agreement for that. Nothing strange. It's just talking about the 2-1 buy down and how the credit is being used towards that. The one big thing that I do like realtors to know is you guys are the trusted advisors of the buyers in a lot of cases. So they're going to come to you with questions. They sometimes will come to you with comparisons between lenders. The big thing with this buy down is that the reduced terms do not show up on the loan estimate. So, and it doesn't show up on the closing disclosure either. So a lot of buyers, especially if they don't have a lender that they can trust, or if the lender has done a very bad job of explaining how this program works, they may think that the lender is being sketchy or shady by not including that on the loan estimate. And it's good to always double check this stuff, because obviously lenders, they're not all reputable. So you want to make sure that they're getting a very reputable lender that's helping them out. But in this case, it's not, it's never going to show up. So let the buyers know, hey, if you're talking about a 2-1 buy down with a lender, it's just not going to show up on the loan estimate. They need to provide you something else that kind of shows the breakdown and kind of walk you through how the payments are going to work out. So I have like a separate spreadsheet that I always send out to my buyers when they're doing a 2-1 buy down. It basically breaks down the whole payment structure of year 1, year 2, and then year 3 and beyond, so they know exactly what they're getting into. But again, the loan estimate and the closing disclosure are always based on the market rate, not the reduced rate. So just let your buyers know that that's typical when they get an estimate. Loan programs available. Obviously, you can do really any kind of 30-year fixed program. So Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, there's no differences there. FHA or VA, you can do 30-year fixed. It's not open to like 15 or 20 years, just because the whole point of this is just from a monthly payment standpoint. It's to reduce the payment as much as possible for those first 2 years. So it's not really a product that most people would even look at if they were already comfortable with the payment of a 15 or a 20-year program. Those are already by nature, kind of an accelerated payment structure where you're fine with a bigger payment to pay off the loan faster. So that's why you're only going to see these on 30-year loans. So one of the things, obviously, again, this program's not perfect. It's not for everybody. You see it marketed on social media. You see it marketed everywhere else as though it's the greatest thing ever. Yes, it's a good program, but don't get me wrong. There's always pros and cons to every type of loan program. And anybody not saying, the negatives versus the positives are just not, it's more of a sales tactic at that point. And that's not what we should be doing here. So, the pros, again, significantly reduced payments in the first 2 years. So there's not really a program that's going to have as big of an impact on the first 2 years of payments as this one. There is another type of buy down. There's a 3-2-1 buy down that probably is going to gain more popularity as we go, but it's just not, it's not a feasible program for most people, just because the credits that are required to do a 3-2-1, basically meaning that their rate is reduced 3% in year 1, reduced 2% year 2, and 1% year 3. It would require such a huge credit that most of the time it doesn't conform with the seller credit contribution limits. And most of the time sellers just aren't comfortable giving that big of a credit, or you're worried about the appraisal coming back too low. I mean, we're talking $20,000 to $25,000 in seller credits that are needed to do that 3-2-1. So the 2-1 is usually kind of a sweet spot there, where you can get by with a $10,000 or $11,000 credit, and that might still be fine, where the appraisal is not going to be an issue and the sellers are comfortable with that. So this is probably the best program for a reduced payment structure for years 1 and 2. So again, the other big pro is if they do drop, the rates do drop in the first 2 years, you can refinance and still take full credit for the seller credit that you're getting. So you're not losing that money at all. And then again, it can help bridge the gap for the buyers expecting more income. If their financial position is going to change over the next couple of years, this is a great program for that. And just really in general, anybody buying a first house, this is a huge benefit just because of the added expenses that they might not expect for the first 2 years. This can help, put them in a better financial position if they don't have a ton of reserves or anything available for emergencies. This can be a huge lifesaver if their first 2 years payments are significantly reduced. So the big one for me is just, it's a seller advantage. It's getting creative and getting your house listed instead of just reverting to the standard price reduction. So everybody selling their house is obviously seeing a change in the market. It's not the same as 6 months ago or a year ago, where you just put it on the market and it sells in 24 hours. That's just not the market that we're in. So you have to get creative. Sellers, listing agents, everybody has to kind of get creative to get their house sold for top dollar. And this is one of the ways to do it. And neighbors are happy because it doesn't require as many price reductions. It just keeps everything a little bit more normalized instead of just significantly reducing the price as plan A. So the big cons with it, anytime you're doing a seller credit, you're by nature you're paying a higher price for the house. So if you're paying 500,000 for a house and there's a $10,000 seller credit, you're obviously paying more than you could have if you didn't go with a seller credit. So it's really just a way of obviously paying a little bit more for the house, but in some cases it certainly makes sense to do it that way. The other big thing would be, buyers could benefit more from a seller credit towards closing costs. I see this more in states that have like high closing costs or high property taxes. So if you've got like a state like New Jersey, or sometimes in Texas, you'll have pretty high taxes. Even in Texas, you see this tons with the 2-1 buy down, with the seller credits being fine. But like Maryland, or places that have like recordation taxes where the closing costs are just very high, then in a lot of cases you could just simply use the credit to cover closing costs. And if that's the case, then you're better off just doing it that way in some cases, because it's just more money in your pocket day one, as opposed to worrying, oh, my monthly payments reduced over each month. But you could just have that big lump sum of money that the buyers could have access to right from the start. So the other big con is that this isn't necessarily a con. It's just that people haven't kind of gotten used to this program yet, where people need to be educated. Everybody kind of has to be on board with it. You can't really go in as a listing agent and promote this if none of the buyers understand it, or if the buyers' agents have no clue about this program and understand how to take advantage of it. So the more education that we can do, the whole point of this type of webinar is to try to get as much information out to the market. All agents, listing agents, and buyers agents, and buyers and sellers. The more people we can get used to this program, the better it is for everybody. So certainly share this with people. Let them know. Let me know if you have other people in your group that would like more education with this, and I'm happy to go through this with them as well. Because again, we need to all kind of do this together. We need more people educated with this process. So anything that I can do to help, please let me know. The other con would be the reduced payment in the first 2 years can create some payment shock. So the last thing we want to do is have somebody get used to a reduced payment in those first 2 years and suddenly get freaked out that the payment went up so much in year 3. A lot of that comes down to the lender being very good and understanding that they need to kind of harp on what the payment's going to look like in year 3 and beyond, and make sure that the people are comfortable with that. So the last thing you want to do is try to approve somebody, thinking that they can afford a house year 1, and then they're not going to be able to handle the payment year 3, even though they qualify for the payment. There's obviously a big difference between affording and qualifying for a loan. And then longer term scenarios might benefit more from a permanent buy down. I went through that before. If they're going to keep it for more than 4 years and there's no chance of refinancing, then permanent buy down might be the better option. So this is a seller concession sheet. So if you have questions, or if you need one of these, let me know. Most people, I think most realtors already have some kind of cheat sheet for this. But again, like I said, the 3%, that's the least that you can ever do. So that's more than enough to cover the 2-1 buy down in all of these scenarios. So in terms of a calculation, this is how everything's calculated. And if you have any questions on this, I'm happy to send my calculator out. This is just a Google sheet that I've created. This is basically what I send to my buyers to kind of walk them through the payment structure for each of these. So let me know if you'd like a copy of this, and I can send it to you. You can just make a copy and use it however you want. But basically, you just plug in the purchase price of $500,000 or whatever it is. You plug in the down payment and the current interest rate, and it does all the work for you. And then it will show you the payments, based on year 1, 2, and 3 and beyond. Once you plug in a little bit of information with the taxes. But this is helpful so that they can visualize, like the buyers can actually see what the payments are going to look like. Plus, it just has the calculator where you need to know, the bare minimum seller concession that we need in the contract. It's going to be listed here, so you've got that. That's basically it for the 2-1 buy down. There is a program called a 1-0 buy down, which again, I don't see this being. I think this is more of a marketing ploy that some lenders are going to show. It's just not. It's not going to be viable for most people, because the whole point of this is that it costs less for a seller credit. It only costs maybe $3,000 or $4,000 at the most for a seller credit. So if you're not in a situation where you can negotiate as large of a seller credit for the 2-1 buy down, this is another alternative, but in most cases, you could simply just use that $3,000 seller credit to cover closing costs. And that's probably a better bet than just reducing your rate in the first year. So, again, this is kind of the design of it. If the current market rate's 7, then the first year they pay 6%. And that's the idea, is you're just using that seller credit to reduce the rate for the first year. Again, here's the calculator for that. It's part of my temporary buy down calculator. So if you want that, feel free to shoot me an email, and then we can run through that together. But it takes a much smaller seller credit. But again, if it's a smaller seller credit, chances are there's enough closing costs that you could have taken advantage of it without doing a buy down to begin with. So that's basically it for the buy down and the calculations. Again, let me know if you have any questions or if you would like a copy of the calculator. Just send me an email, or you can call or text me. But I can send that over to you as well. It's just a shareable Google Sheet that you can use. But if you're running into this, please let me know. And if you have questions with how to structure it, really from a contract standpoint, you're really just adding it in as a normal seller credit. You don't have to ask, hey, I need 11,000 for a 2-1 buy down. You don't have to be that specific. You just need to figure out what the seller credit needs to be and ask for and negotiate that big of a seller credit or more. So, the contract situation for an agent, very easy. You're just structuring it in as a seller credit. Nothing else really changes. And then obviously the lender just needs to be on board with kind of how to set that up internally to make sure that that's the best program, and to kind of walk the buyers through that process. But I'm here with any questions or anything else that you have concerns with, or if you run into a scenario where you'd like to kind of spitball off of me and kind of brainstorm how to do this versus maybe a price reduction, or if you'd like a more detailed kind of comparison for a specific house that you're listing, certainly let me know, and I'm happy to go through that. If you have a seller that's curious about how this program works, I'm happy to go through it with them as well. But I certainly appreciate the time. I will get this all kicked off here. And again, let me know if there's anything else I can do for you in the future. I appreciate you joining. Thank you.